in the heart of Gaza, where the streets echo with shattered glass and the sky wears the smoke of burning dreams, I found something no camera could fully capture. Not the devastation, no. The world has already seen that. Not the politics nor the pain, but something quieter, more powerful. Almost sacred. It was a smile. A boy stood barefoot among rubble, his home reduced to dust, his future uncertain. And yet there it was, a smile, gentle, unflinching, undeniably real. It cut through the noise like a whisper cuts through silence. I was not prepared for that moment. Because in that child's face, in that small, impossible smile, was something I had read about, studied, maybe even admired from a distance, but never truly understood. Islam. Not as a religion written in books or debated on screens, but as a living, breathing force, as strength beneath suffering, as calm beneath chaos, as beauty surviving in broken places. And that's when it hit me. I'd come looking for answers in data, in headline, in history. But the truest revelation came from a child who had lost everything but faith. And what is that faith? It is the belief that even when the world forgets you, God sees you. That even when buildings collapse, the soul stands tall. That even when food is scarce and water is rationed, prayer remains in abundance. That even when your body is tired, your spirit can still rise before dawn to say, Allahu Akbar. This speech is not about sympathy, it is about awakening. It is about understanding what it truly means to live in surrender, not as defeat, but as dignity. Because Islam in Gaza is not merely practiced, it is embodied. It is woven into the footsteps that walk past tanks with grace. It is in the hands that give bread to neighbours even when their own shelves are empty. It is in the whispered Subhan Allah after a night of shelling. It is in that one smile that defied everything around it. And in that moment I realized this isn't just the power of a child. It's the power of a people, the power of purpose, the power of Islam when it is not just believed, but lived with every breath, every smile. So listen closely, not just with your ears, but with your heart. Because sometimes the greatest truths do not come in grand speeches or sacred texts. They come in fleeting, quiet moments, a single look, a simple gesture that teach you more about God, resilience, and the human soul than years of study ever could. And for me, that moment was one smile in Gaza. In the midst of Gaza's rubble, where buildings are reduced to bones of concrete and the air carries more dust than hope, I witnessed a moment that defied the entire landscape around it. It was not the silence after a bombing. It was not the pause between sirens. It was something far more quiet, and yet somehow louder than all of it. A smile. A child, no older than 10, maybe less, stood barefoot on the edge of what was once his home. The structure was now nothing more than a fractured skeleton, rebar curling out like broken fingers. Behind him, a line of grieving mothers clutched photographs. Ahead of him, aid trucks passed by with solemn determination. He stood in between loss and survival, and yet his face wore something astonishing. He smiled. It was not a performance. It was not for the camera. It was not the grin of ignorance, nor the mask of denial. It was real, quiet, deep, as if he had discovered something the rest of us had not. A stillness, steadiness, a truth so profound it needed no explanation. That one smile stopped something in me. How can such a thing even exist here? Where does a child robbed of safety and comfort find the strength to smile? Not just smile, but smile with peace. In that moment, the environment around him began to feel like the wrong lens through which to view the situation. I had arrived with the mindset of an observer, looking at facts, timelines, data. But this single gesture turned that lens inward. I was no longer looking at destruction. I was looking at resilience. I was no longer witnessing a humanitarian crisis. I was witnessing spiritual clarity. There's a difference between surviving and being alive. This boy wasn't merely surviving war. He was living something deeper. Something that war, occupation, and tragedy could not touch. His body was fragile, yes. His surroundings were bleak, yes, but his soul is unshaken. That smile revealed a kind of wealth the world doesn't measure. The richness of faith, the strength of the spirit, and the discipline of the heart. It became clear to me that I was not just seeing the aftermath of destruction. I was seeing the visible trace of something invisible, something flowing from within him outward. And that something was Islam. Not the Islam filtered through politics or stereotypes. Not the Islam dissected by analysts or feared in headlines. This was the Islam I hadn't fully seen before. The Islam of inner peace, of anchored purpose, of a relationship so intimate with the divine that even in disaster, the soul chooses calm. That child's smile was not a denial of reality. It was an answer to it. His smile said, yes, the world may take everything from me, but not my trust in God. Not my connection to something higher. He had nothing, and yet he had everything. He had lost a home, but held on to heaven. He had seen death, but still believed in life. He was surrounded by injustice, but he smiled as if justice already lived within him. There is something hauntingly beautiful about that. In the developed world, peace is something we build with policies, security systems, and insurance. In Gaza, it is built with prayer, with remembrance, with the echo of Bismillah before every uncertain day. That boy smiled because in his heart he had surrendered not to fear, but to faith. And in that surrender, he had found something many of us spend a lifetime chasing. He had found stillness in the storm. And what shook me was not the pain of Gaza, but the purity I saw in that one human moment. A child who should be crying, laughing instead, not because his world was fine, but because his world did not define his faith, his Creator did. I will never forget that smile. It wasn't just a child's expression, it was a revelation, a window into what it means to live with true conviction. To know that even if the world collapses around you, you still have the sky. You still have God. You still have the power to smile. And that is a kind of strength the world cannot understand. But Islam does. What does it mean to have faith when everything around you has fallen? When the roof over your head is gone, when the walls that once held your laughter are now dust, and when the sky above brings fear instead of comfort, what remains? This question haunted me as I walked through the debris-littered streets of Gaza. I saw children playing where bombs had fallen days before. I saw men rebuilding walls with bare hands and borrowed hope. I saw women sweeping shattered glass from broken thresholds as if preparing for guests. There was an unspoken rhythm to it all, pain followed by patience. Fear followed by prayer. Loss followed by la ilaha. It didn't make sense by worldly standards, but it made perfect sense in the language of faith. Because here, faith isn't something practiced only in calm, it's something born in chaos and made unshakable through trial. When everything is taken from you, what you truly believe is all that remains. And in Gaza, I saw faith standing tall amidst ruin, not just in words, but in the way people moved, the way they waited, the way they carried themselves. As if they knew a secret the rest of the world hadn't discovered yet. A secret carved into their bones through generation. That this life is not the end, and suffering is not the final chapter. Islam teaches that every hardship is a test, and every test is a path back to God. In the comfort of a secure life, such lessons are often theoretical. But in Gaza, they are lived every day. The Quran doesn't just sit on a shelf there. It breathes in the hearts of those who recite it while the earth trembles beneath them. They don't just read verses about patience, endurance, and trust. They become those verses. They live them with every step, every breath, every tear. There is something deeply transformative about this level of faith. It's not the kind that disappears when life gets hard. It's the kind that grows stronger in the darkness. The kind that says, even if I lose everything, I have already given it to God. That child's smile was not naive, it was informed. Informed by the worldview Islam instills, that this life is temporary, and that every trial carries with it a divine purpose. I spoke to a man who had lost 3 sons. His eyes were tired, but they did not waver. When I asked him how he could still stand, he looked at me and simply said, "They are with Allah, and Allah is enough for me." That sentence broke something inside me, not because it was sad, but because it was so powerful. It wasn't just acceptance, it was transcendence. Faith in that moment wasn't a crutch. It was a compass. A guide, a structure more stable than any concrete wall. When the world collapses, belief becomes the home you carry within. And Islam, with all its structure, It's 5 daily prayers, it's fasting, it's charity, it's remembrance. Provide something extraordinary, order inside the disorder. Imagine the sound of bombs in the distance, the uncertainty of night, the hunger, the fear, and then the call to prayer. Rising through the stillness like a thread of light. And people respond not out of habit, but out of conviction. Because that call is not just a ritual, it's a reminder you are seen, you are heard, you are guided. In a place like Gaza, faith becomes not only a source of comfort, but a form of resistance. A way of saying, you can shake my world, but not my foundation. I saw young boys with Qurans tucked under their arms, memorizing verses between air raids. I saw women making dough with eyes closed, lips moving faster than fear. These were not acts of desperation. They were acts of defiance, spiritual defiance. When everything else is uncertain, faith is what remains certain. When every material support is stripped away, belief becomes the spine that keeps you upright. In Gaza, faith isn't just present, it's dominant. It doesn't just exist in quiet corners. It fills the air like incense, invisible yet undeniable. That is what Islam provides when everything is lost. Not just hope for a better future, but purpose in the present. Not just the promise of reward, but the reassurance that every tear is counted, every pain is seen, and every moment of endurance is sacred. This is what I learned in Gaza. Faith is not fragile, it is forged in fire. And when everything else breaks, it is the only thing strong enough to hold a soul together. Submission. To some, the word feels heavy, even uncomfortable. In a world that glorifies control, power, and self-determination, the idea of surrendering to anything can seem like weakness. But in Gaza, I saw the opposite. I saw people who had been stripped of control, who had every reason to fall into despair, and yet stood tall with a kind of strength that seemed almost supernatural. And it was then I understood. Submission in Islam is not about giving up, it is about giving over. It is not weakness, it is will, sharpened and purified by something greater than the self. Islam at its core means a submission, a surrender to the will of Allah. But this surrender is not passive. It is not defeat. It is a conscious, powerful act. To submit is to trust when you cannot see, to continue when you are exhausted, and to believe even when you are bleeding. In Gaza, submission is everywhere, and it is fierce. I watched a father lead his family in prayer over the ruins of their home. Behind him, ash and twisted steel. In front of him, Mecca. He bowed. He placed his forehead on the earth. And in that moment, he was whole, because his submission wasn't to the destruction around him. It was to the Creator of the universe. He was choosing to kneel before the one who controls the skies, even when the sky had fallen on him. That is not weakness. That is a strength most of us never tap into. It made me realize something profound. The people of Gaza are not helpless. They are held by a deeper order, a divine reality. Their submission is not to circumstance, but to certainty. The certainty that God is not absent, that every hardship is known, that justice, true justice, belongs to the one who sees all. That kind of submission creates warriors of the soul. In Gaza, submission manifests in the details of daily life. A woman boiling lentils over open flames, still covering her head, still saying, Bismillah. A child reciting Surah Al-Fatiha while sitting beside a hospital bed. A man collecting broken books, kissing the Quran and placing it gently in a clean cloth as if preserving a living thing. These are acts of submission, quiet, defiant, sacred. And what I realized is this: submission gives meaning to suffering. Without it, pain is chaos. But with it, pain becomes purposeful. In Islam, hardship is not random, it's refinement. A soul is not abandoned, it is being shaped. There is a deep knowing among the people here that what is lost in this world is not lost in the eyes of Allah, that He is not indifferent, that He records every drop of patience, every breath of faith, every silent tear. This is what submission truly means. It is to take your broken heart and place it whole into the hands of the one who created it. It is to walk through fire and still speak of mercy. It is to be exhausted and still rise before dawn to pray. It is to look at ruins and still say, Alhamdulillah. It is to let go of the illusion of control, and in doing so, find peace deeper than control ever offered. The world sees submission as loss of autonomy, but Gaza showed me the opposite. In a place where people have no control over borders, over electricity, over access to water or medicine, submission to Allah gives them something they can never lose: identity, dignity, clarity of purpose. In fact, it's their submission that makes them ungovernable by fear. Because when you've already submitted to God, you cannot be ruled by man. That's the power I saw in their eyes. That's the reason behind the strength in their walk, the stillness in their gaze, the resolve in their prayers. The world may misunderstand them, politicians may try to label them. But the truth is, they have found a kind of freedom most of us only dream of. The freedom that comes when you're no longer fighting to control everything, but instead anchored in trust. To submit in Islam is not to collapse, it is to rise with purpose. Rise with a power that no weapon can crush and no system can suppress. In Gaza, this submission is not just theology, it is lived reality. And it is beautiful in Gaza. Time does not move in hours, it moves between sirens. The sound of rockets overhead, the thud of explosions in the distance, the cry of a mother just before dawn. And yet somewhere in the chaos, a sound rises that is older than fear, deeper than pain. It is not the sound of war, it is the sound of remembrance. It is the call to prayer. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. The words stretch through shattered neighborhoods, over fractured rooftops, through the haze of smoke and sand. And people respond, not with panic, not with haste, but with reverence. They stop, they wash, they pray. Even when the world outside burns, inside their hearts, something glows quietly, endlessly. It is this act, this commitment that shook me to my core, because when the call to prayer echoes through destruction, it doesn't just summon bodies to bow, it awakens the soul. It's a reminder that time belongs not to governments, not to armies, not even to tragedy. It belongs to God. There are no perfect conditions here. Often there is no water, often no clean floor, often the walls are broken. But still, 5 times a day, people face the Qibla and raise their hands. The Adhan becomes more than a ritual. It becomes a rhythm, a heartbeat. It restores what the world tries to take, and it speaks to the resilience of faith, how it can adapt, survive, and even flourish where logic says it shouldn't. In the calm, prayer is discipline. In war, it is defiance. I met a teenager who prayed under a stairwell because it was the only place left standing in his house. He smiled and said, "Allah can see anywhere." I stood speechless. That kind of faith doesn't come from theory, it comes from lived belief. A faith that's not crushed by the collapse of walls, because it was never built on walls. It was built in the heart. The call to prayer in Gaza is not background noise, it is front and center. When sirens fade, the Adhan takes over. And it doesn't just call the faithful to stand, it calls them to remember who they are. In a world that strips away dignity, prayer restores it. In a place where the future is uncertain, prayer anchors the present. It turns a broken floor into